Good afternoon. Welcome to the Poverty Innovation Summit. I'm Mo Wright, head of Rama Consulting, and we are excited to be on this journey with all of you as we plot out the strategic roadmap for the Rise Together Innovation Center. All of you have been invited here because you are so important to this community and you represent so many sectors and areas of work, but most importantly, you are the thinkers we wanted in the room as we think about our next for the Rise Together Innovation Center. And so I'll get into that in just a moment. So here's what we're going to be doing today. We really want to use this as an opportunity to, one, introduce you to the work of the Innovation Center. You may or may not have heard about this thing that is new, but it's really been in the works for the last several years. And so we'll have a number of leaders who will come and talk about what the current state of the Innovation Center is, but also where we're going. And really today is a critical component of where we're going because you all will help to shape the agenda, the initiatives, in so many ways, the work of the center to move forward. We want to use this as an opportunity to engage all of you to think about how should we be thinking about innovation around this big, daunting thing we call in our community poverty. And it was funny that one of the data points at your table is illuminated it so well that we have almost 200,000 people in this community, in this county, who meet the definition of poverty, and most of those are children. And so we've got work to do because we know that as many of us were able to get here through our own means, there are folks that had to make decisions this morning about what they eat, what their children had to eat, if or not they had a job to go to, and how it was, from a mobility perspective, they would get there. And so it will take all of our efforts. There is no silver bullet. It would take all of us to coming together and thinking differently. It's not just about more programs and services. It's really about how we can bring this community together to do something bigger and different than we ever have around this big issue. And so we're glad that all of you are here. And so in just a moment, I'm going to bring forward really the leader who has really been behind the scenes for all of us and helping to bring these people together, who's been working as a volunteer, although it didn't always seem like volunteer work, I'm sure, to bring all of this work together and then get the center stood up. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about the agenda for this afternoon. After some brief opening remarks from a few dynamic individuals, we will convene what we call an innovation panel. Some select leaders who we've asked to come and help us to think about how we should be thinking about this notion of innovation around poverty. And that sounds like something a little funny, right? That we don't innovate around this idea of eliminating poverty. And yet I would submit to you that that is exactly what we must do if we really want to move the needle. We cannot continue business as usual, even as good as our social service network is, and even as strong as all of the partners in this room and others are working on this issue each and every day. At that point, we really want to have you at your tables, what we're calling strategy circles, to really engage in a conversation around some specific areas of the blueprint, which we'll get into, about what to do and how to do it, and how should we be thinking about organizing ourselves to attack these issues for the long term. And so you at your tables will be helping to have a conversation and dialogue, and we'll give you some instructions around that. And at that point, we're going to want to hear your big ideas at the end of today. This is very much an ideation session from a strategic planning perspective, so we want to get that out of you, and then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. So we appreciate your energy today. As I thought about the Rise Together, a kind of mantra hit me this morning in terms of what we really wanting from this group today. And we think about this idea of rise. What I'm really looking for is realistic, innovative solutions for everyone. So keep that in mind today. Realistic, innovative solutions for everyone. When we think about this work that is ahead of us, we want all of you thinking about realistic, innovative solutions that really serve the whole of our community. With that, let me bring forward Trudy Bartley, the Associate Vice President for Government and Community Relations at The Ohio State University, but also the chair of the Rise Together Innovation Center board. She has been in this work before there was a board, and long before any of you knew anything about the blueprint and how we would organize ourselves around that work. So Trudy's going to introduce it, and then we will have a number of individuals come behind her to talk about both what is the blueprint for poverty in our community and how we're going to organize ourselves around it. Trudy?
Good afternoon, everybody. It is so wonderful to see familiar faces and good to see new faces as well. I want to welcome you to the Rise Together Summit. As Mo has said, I have been volunteering with this work, but it's a passion to really understand and think about those who are not at the table, those who are in under-resourced neighborhoods, those who are looking at how do they become sustainable with their households and what their actual goal is for their particular family. And that's what we've been doing with the Rise Together Blueprint, with the initiation and inaugural Innovation Center. In 2017, I got a phone call from an elected official, and as I've said many times before, many times you look at your phone and you see who it is, and you say, do I pick this up? And I did, and it was John O'Grady. And he said, I really need your assistance in bringing people together to have this conversation around poverty. We have done so much, we have put so much money into solving poverty, but the needle has not moved. So what is it that we can do that's different? What is it that we can do that is groundbreaking? And let's bring together the corporate community, the philanthropic community, the public-private partnerships that we have, as known as the Columbus Way, and bringing residents and individuals who are in poverty to the table to understand from those individuals, particularly, what are their barriers to their idea of success. And so we worked together for 18 months with a consultant, and we came up with the People's Plan, as you will hear Joy Bivens discuss, because this is truly the People's Plan. There were 200 different community town halls, conversations that we had to actually understand what the issues were. We talked to providers, we talked to individuals, we talked to the corporate community, and what came out of this is that poverty is systemic. And poverty is systemic, and it's based upon race. When you think about back 400 years, there have been policies and laws that have been implemented intentionally to keep some people down and to allow others to rise. And so how do we as a community come together, not only from a local standpoint, but also from a state and a national standpoint to make that difference and a change? And that's what the Innovation Center is about. Of course, the Rise Together Blueprint, which we came up with, is 13 goals and 120 action steps, which are currently being implemented by Job and Family Services and all the human services units within Franklin County. But the Rise Together Innovation Center is going to be different because it's about innovation, not about what we have seen other cities do, but what is the opportunity to do something that we will do best. So today it's about having your great minds at the table, having those great conversations, coming up with things that you may think this is ridiculous, but nothing's ridiculous. Everything is on the table. Because there are individuals who are out on the street today who need that injection of our voices, because as I said, their voices are not around the table to let us know exactly what their needs are. So I would like to thank, number one, the county commissioners for their trust in my leading this organization from a board standpoint. I'd like to thank my co-chair, Matt Habish, for putting up with me. Because, you know, sometimes when men are with a bunch of women around the table, they don't have a voice. And he's been very gracious with us. But I'd like to have Joy Bivens come up and really give you an overview of the Rise Together Blueprint. Some of you may be familiar with it, others may not, but it's just an overview of what that is and how it relates to the Innovation Center. So again, thank you everyone for attending today. I look forward to having little mini conversations with you, particularly those who I've not met before. And again, thank you for coming and lending your voice to individuals who have no voice at the table. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Come on. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. That is so much better because you are going to use your brains, and we need as much energy and excitement in this room as possible because there's a lot of innovation and strategic leaders in the room. I am Joy Bivens. I'm the director of, what am I now? I am the Deputy County Administrator of Health and Human Services for Franklin County. I oversee Job and Family Services, Office on Aging that works with our senior population, Justice Policy and Programs that works with our population in the jail and also those who are justice involved, as well as child support. I stand here on behalf of the Franklin County Commissioners, Commissioner John O'Grady, Commissioner and President Erica Crawley, and Commissioner Kevin Boyce. So my job, I'm tasked to do the overview of the Poverty Blueprint Plan. Before I do that, how many of you actually seen the Poverty Blueprint Plan? Good. How many of you actually worked on the Poverty Blueprint Plan when we pulled you into a meeting and held you hostage for 9 hours? That's even better. Andrew, can you do me a favor? Can you grab that chair for me really quick? So when we started the Poverty Blueprint Plan, the commissioners said, and I need you to stand right here with the chair. Thank you. I think pull a little closer. People say, thank you. Just stand right there for me because you're going to have to move that chair back because Mo and Tiffany are going to fire me. All right, that's good. So when we started the Poverty Blueprint Plan, the commissioners called me in a room and said, Joy, you know, just in your agencies alone, we're spending, how much money do you think, millions of dollars just in those agencies that I mentioned in trying to mitigate poverty? Throw out a number. Well, the county is $2 billion, yes, that's good. But the human service agencies under Franklin County, how many? Job and Family Services, Office on Aging, Justice Policy and Program, Office on, child support, how many? How much? 160 million. Thank you. 160 million. Why are we not solving anything, right? Why do we continue to come up with great programs, but it seems that there is an issue of have-haves and have-nots in our community. So they wanted to make sure that we were all coming collectively together and sharing our best practices and, you know, hearing from everyone in the community. So because we had a lot of providers doing good work, and they are doing good work. However, what we understood was, Elizabeth, if you were doing good work on the east side of town with your youth program, and I'm doing good work on the west, well, I'm not doing good work on the west side of town, right? Our community is not winning. Just because she's winning, her organization winning, our community is not winning, our youth are not winning, right? So we needed to figure out how can we create a blueprint that we are all working from so that we can solve the same problems using the same data, working with the same families and residents that we say we serve and love every day. So the commissioners had a meeting, and I'm going to share this because I think it's important. Before we started this on this endeavor, and Commissioner O'Grady called Trudy, and I also called Trudy, and I said, hey. And she probably bypassed my phone call a couple of times before she answered it. But, you know, we had a meeting with all the commissioners, and at the time it was Commissioner Marilyn Brown in the room. And one of the things I said was, you know, if you want to go down this road, be prepared to talk about race. And people can't cringe up at it. You can't be uncomfortable. You can't feel like someone's accusing you. But you got to be honest and say, you know, when you look at the data, whether it's 400, 250 years, the same neighborhoods, the same people struggling, something's wrong. And we got to call an apple an apple. So we went out and we found a consultant to assist us in the Poverty Blueprint Plan. And we had all these ideas of what we were going to do. But one of the things we wanted to make sure was, and when I walk into a room, and this is what I always do with my team, for every empty seated chair in this room, I'm going to ask each and every one of you to do this. Bring the person that's not in the room, the resident that you're serving, right? Those who are living in poverty. So this chair today represents the population that we are trying to fight so hard for in order to understand how can we move them up that economic mobility ladder and bring their voice in the room today with you, right? So that's what we try to do, and that's what we did when we started the Poverty Blueprint Plan. So we went everywhere. We went into early learning centers and asked mamas and daddies. We rode buses. We went into homeless camps in the dead of winter. We went into the jail system. We spoke to students. We spoke to seniors. We spoke to new American citizens. We spoke to anyone and everyone and asked three basic questions. I'm going to simplify. What are we not doing? What can we do more of? And what can we do to move you up that economic mobility ladder? And there were over 200 conversations. So from those 200 conversations, we put together a group of stakeholders, many of you in the room, faith-based organizations, business, human services, everyone who we believe that touches people in our community. And we fleshed out those conversations. And there were about four themes. It was work, the things that we know, the issues that impact people. What youth, what else? Workforce, livable wages, all of it, right? All those things, right? One of the things that kept rising to the top in those conversations was the issue of racism. So instead of waiting, the commissioners, and I commend them for being brave to do this, they brought in an organization called the Race Institute out of North Carolina or Tennessee, I think North Carolina. And versus having a kumbaya meeting, Mallory, about, be nice to your neighbor, don't do that anymore, this is how you sit and talk to someone that looks like you. We went over the history of the establishment of these United States of America and we talked about race, and we talked about slavery. And we talked about some of the policies that we put in place that are still in existence, but only thing we have done is become more sophisticated in changing them and changing the name of them, but we still have the same structures, and that's why neighborhoods have not moved up the economic mobility ladder with the same individuals and families being represented. And it was very uncomfortable, but what I will tell you was those rooms were made up of business leaders, faith leaders, human services leaders, and we all came together and we understood each other from each other's perspective, and we committed to doing better for this community. The other thing we did with those over 200 conversations after we held people hostage for Trudy helped and Matt held people hostage for 9 hours in those meetings for so many months. We fleshed those conversations out, and then we developed a committee in order to come up with those 4 themes. And what we said was, government can't move these goals and these action steps forward. Why do you think that is, Joanna? I was so mad at Trudy and Matt when they kept saying this. I was like, they better stop saying that. That is not true. Government is good and great, and we're trying to change lives. Why do you think that is?
Well, we only control a certain amount of the revenues. Our private partners have to be aligned with us.
You were so good and so eloquent. We are rigid, we are restrictive, and it takes us a long time to do things because we want to make sure that nobody gets a quarter more than what they're supposed to get, Danielle, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to govern the people's dollar. So we decided from those 120 goals, 13 goals, 120 action steps, which came from the people. So today when you see these 13 goals, 120 action steps, and you want to add commas and take out words, please understand that you are taking out the words of the people that live here in our community that said these are the things that they wanted, right? So I assumed during this process that we were going to take it on and make a charge, right, and do great things. But Trudy and others kept saying, government can't do it, government can't do it. And then I didn't speak to her for 9 months after that, Joanna. No, just kidding. So we decided from those conversations, we needed an organization that could be agile, that can move at the speed of business, right? That could test big ideas, that could advocate for policy where government couldn't, right? And could be the voice for people and residents here in our community. So that's where the idea of the Innovation Center came. And there were a lot of conversations on why do we need another nonprofit? We need another nonprofit for the very thing that we just discussed. Because now the Innovation Center, and I keep telling Danielle, she's the enforcer. I like enforcers, Mo. I do, because I don't want to be the enforcer all the time. But she's the enforcer. And I started this conversation off by, we have a lot of great programs in this community, right? You all are providing, wouldn't you say your programs are great? They're good, right? But we still have, we had 330,000 people on Medicaid last year. 230,000 people on Medicaid last year. We have 330,000 now. Something's wrong, right? So we needed an organization, and we need Danielle's organization to convene all of us and for us to share our best practices, to really use targeted universalistic approaches so that we can be more systemic in our approach in addressing poverty. So in summary, again, there are 13 goals, 120 action steps. We went through every crevice of this county, and we did not just work in the Black communities. Many times I think people assume that when you look at documents like this, it was the Black neighborhoods. It was not just the Black neighborhoods. It was Upper Arlington, it was Hilliard. We went everywhere, right? Because we wanted to hear everyone's voice. So this document and this summit today is really important to the Franklin County Commissioners because we just don't want to do good work all the time. That's great. But we really want to be transformative in our approaches so that we don't even have to do summit like these, right? So someone should be putting me out of a job for Job and Family Services because we have so many people receiving public assistance. So this Innovation Center is going to be that entity that we believe is the entity to move us forward. So with that, I thank you. But again, please today, as you are sharing your best practices, sharing your innovation, please make sure that you are speaking for the persons, the children that are not in the room and not in your own best interest. And please welcome our dynamic leader who we search high and low for, Ms. Danielle Sidnor.
All right, how y'all doing today? Y'all quiet. So thank you for joining us at the Rise Together Innovation Center Poverty Innovation Summit. That's a mouthful. I know some of you have no idea who I am, and you don't really know what the Innovation Center is gonna do, but you showed up here today anyway, so either you're crazy, but for that I still say thank you for coming. I'm going to deviate from my script a little bit, but I promise to my team that it'll tie in, so bear with me. I'm a mother of 2 teenage sons. One is 19 years old. He's a rising sophomore at Wayne State University. The other is 17. He graduates actually Tuesday next week and will be attending North Carolina A&T in the fall. Aggie Pride. And my Tuesday this week started like most Tuesdays after a holiday. It really felt like a Monday, right? So I talked to my oldest son, who's in Detroit, a few times, because he was trying to figure out how to get a cashier's check so he could get his permit for his apartment parking pass. So he calls me again about 7:20 in the evening. I'm leaving the gym, and he chats about something else he needs. And then a few minutes later, I see a charge on his credit card come across that's declined for $175 at the gas station. So immediately I call his phone like, you're not calling me back for this, but what's going on? Why are you getting charged $175 at the gas station? He's like, oh, Mom, it was the outside pump. I went inside. It's fine. I'm about to go DoorDash. So almost exactly 2 hours later, he calls me again. And at this moment, I can hear in his voice that he's calm but sounds very irritated. So it's about 9:20 p.m. And what came next is one of my worst nightmares as a mother raising 2 Black sons. He said, I was a few blocks away from home, Mom, and I just got swarmed by 5 police officers. They had their weapons drawn. They put me in handcuffs and put me in the back of a police car. And he said they didn't immediately tell me what was going on, but then they finally said, we got reports of shots fired a few blocks away. The suspect was a Black male in a white vehicle. The irony of this is my youngest son and I had just dropped off their white Toyota Corolla on Saturday. So it's been less than a week that he's had his vehicle, and he already had a highly charged interaction with the local police. But what made me the most nervous is that he said he had his phone in his hand when the police approached because he was using it for directions. And so I can only imagine if he had moved the wrong way, I wouldn't be here today talking to y'all about none of this. But what does any of that have to do with poverty and innovation? My son lives on the east side of Detroit, and he was driving through a mostly Black neighborhood, which means not only does he carry a higher amount of risk of community violence, he also has the increased risk of police violence because of the concentration in crime in our neighborhoods, and also the concentration of poverty. The mission of the Rise Together Innovation Center is to convene community and stakeholders of all sectors to acknowledge and combat systemic and structural racism and act as a catalyst for eliminating poverty. We're going to implement bold ideas and tactics to increase equity for all the residents of Franklin County. So what we know about systemic and structural racism, things that Joy and Trudy both just talked about, is that in communities that have been historically redlined, you have higher rates of crime, lower health and education outcomes, and a lack of economic individual self-sufficiency. However, it's become kind of the chicken or egg, where if you have high crime, nobody feels safe, so then there's a lack of new housing, there's a lack of investment, and you have a few new businesses in the area. But also, if you have a lack of new housing, and you have only a few new businesses, and you have a lack of investment, you end up having higher crime and nobody feels safe. So what are we willing to do different to make sure that what happened to my son does not continue to be the norm? The fact that Black males almost always fit the description can't be acceptable. So I was reading an article recently that talked about issues with how we handle violence in America. So I'm gonna give you just a brief excerpt. It says, Brotherin has long argued that mainstream US policy is counterproductively coercive and punitive. His research has shown that helping at-risk people reintegrate into mainstream society, including by offering them cash, is a much more effective way of reducing violence. To give one striking example from Brotherin's research, in 2007, the crime-riddled nation of Ecuador legalized the gangs that had been the source of much violence. The country allowed gangs to be able to remake themselves as cultural associations that could register with the government, which in turn allowed them to qualify for grants and benefit from social programming. Can you guess what happened to the murder rate over the next few years? It plummeted. It's these types of seemingly radical ideas that we will have to learn to embrace. I'm grateful that my son is okay, but I'm even more now committed to this work than ever before. So let me get back to my script, but I thank you guys for giving me your attention while I shared that story with you. There was no way today I could go into this summit without my transparency, because it changed many things for me having him have experienced that. So I'm new to the Columbus area, and I'm quickly becoming acclimated with the best that this city and this county has to offer, including its great restaurants and the fact that it snows less than it does in Cleveland. I was born in Sacramento, California, and I relocated to the east side of Cleveland in the summer of 1995, right before I started the 8th grade. And like most teenagers my age, I loved to listen to music on my Walkman and cut out magazine images of my celebrity crushes and hang them on my bedroom wall. And I was also an avid reader. My family of 8, my mom and dad and 6 kids, were one of the largest in the neighborhood. I'm the 4th of 6 kids. My oldest sister was already an adult, so she stayed back in Sacramento, but like most families, she didn't stay too long. My siblings didn't all look like my dad, so our strong resemblance is something that we are known for, and also our carefree, easy way that we laugh and joke and get along so well. And yes, the saying goes, if you meet a Sidnor, we are probably related. Growing up, my mother had a knack for making fun memories for us out of any situation. One evening when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I came home to a camp out in my living room. My mom had let out the rollaway bed out of our brown twill couch, and we were all huddled around the fireplace with our pillows and our blankets. The house was dark. My mom had lit candles and brought out flashlights for a very authentic evening camping vibe. She was clever like that. Breakfast food was on the menu, one of my favorites. She made eggs and grits and bacon over the fire with her cast iron skillet. Between the crackling and the kindling of the heavenly smoked flavor of our meal, I then understood why Yogi Bear was so fond of campsites. This scene lives on in my memory as a very fond family moment. But what I didn't know at the time was the real reason that the house was dark was because our electricity had been cut off, because we hadn't paid the bill. And the real reason that we were cooking in the fireplace instead of the stove was the same. And as delicious as breakfast food is for dinner, it was one of the very few options that we had at times to feed our very large family because we couldn't always afford much else. Growing up, I didn't know that we were poor. And looking at us, you wouldn't have known either. Sure, my mom used layaway payments to purchase our clothes at department stores. Our family vehicle for 8 people was never large enough to fit everybody. But if you looked at me walking down the street, you wouldn't have known that we also paid our rent using a subsidized housing voucher, and that I didn't often have access to basic utilities. I looked just like anyone else. The data tells us that many people in my situation would struggle academically. They would decline socially and continue to suffer from financial instability into adulthood. So how is it possible that I managed to graduate at the top of my class and become a key leader in the financial services industry and become elected to one of the best organizations in this whole wide world as president of the Cleveland branch of the NAACP? Miss Nana Watson, our Columbus president. One thing is for sure, it wasn't by accident, nor was it the result of what Mo said earlier, one single magic bullet. Rather, it was a series of interventions over a sustained period of time that allowed me to thrive. First, at my parents' insistence, I took gifted and talented classes, and I participated in a number of after-school programs and activities to nurture my potential. They even bused me from schools outside of my neighborhood school to ensure I got access to what I needed. However, that meant I was usually one of the only Black girls in my class. But if not for their advocacy, I wouldn't have had exposure to these programs. Exposure that kids in well-resourced neighborhoods got freely. Secondly, my family was intentional about filling my summer breaks with programs and activities. I've later found out that my grandmother wrote grants to make sure that my cousins and I could participate in some of these summer camps, computer classes, and things like that. Finally, my faith-based community gave my family and I what we needed to have that grounding and stability to rise above our circumstances. But what I've just described is the exception. I am the exception, and I hate it. I hate that for most people in poverty, they don't have access to the tools that they need to get ahead. And particularly in Franklin County, where our biggest driver of poverty is not unemployment, it's underemployment and a lack of wages. As a result, they remain stuck in the vicious cycle of the status quo. And so I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to disrupt the effects of poverty and to create equitable access to opportunity for everyone in Franklin County. Come with me. To create a system that, regardless of a person's zip code, that they have what they need to prosper. Come with me. To implement bold ideas that remove barriers to access for people that need it the most. Come with me. To make choices today that sustain our community, our children, and our citizens tomorrow. Right now, in this very moment, you and I have a unique opportunity to shift a narrative, to provide real solutions that directly improve the quality of life for those in our communities. But one person, one organization, as effective as it may be, can't do it alone. It's gonna take the collective effort of us all to build the sustainable infrastructure that we need to eradicate the effects of poverty. Will you join me? Yes, all right. I wanted to set the stage for us because we know the issues. We've studied the issues. I don't want to study the issues anymore. We have to spend our time and our energy talking about solutions. And so I'm grateful to have Rhema as a team leading us through this process today. We're going to have some panels, but I implore you to think about the person in the chair, to think about me when I was in the chair, to think about you when you were in the chair. And let's work together to do some things that are uncomfortable and disruptive, that people will say, y'all crazy folk got together in a room and came up with this stuff, and we're gonna say, yes, we did, and we plan to implement it. So I thank you. We've got a couple more things that we're gonna do, and then we'll get into our strategy circles.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Wright, and I am with Rama Consulting as well. I am before you right now to introduce to you the panelists for today's innovation panel. The first person is Emily Campbell, who I believe is, there she is. Didn't see her come in, but her name tag disappeared, so I knew she had to be here somewhere. Emily Campbell serves as the Chief Operating Officer for the Center for Community Solutions, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and research think tank with offices in Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio. Emily oversees research, policy, and administration-related activities. Thank you, Emily, for joining us today. We also have Naveed Iqbal, who is the CEO and co-founder at Dollar, a Columbus-based fintech focused on tackling the student debt crisis by surrounding people with the help they need for the biggest financial burdens. Thank you, Naveed. Next, we have Mr. Rob Moore, who's fresh off a vacation. He is the principal for Toyota Analysis. He has worked as an analyst in the public and nonprofit sectors and has analyzed diverse issue areas such as economic development, environment, education, and public health. His specialty is applied microeconomic analysis of public policies and trade-offs between efficiency and equity outcomes in economic development and social safety net programs. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Mr. Kumi Walker, who is co-founder and managing partner of Embedded, a fractional business development company focused on partnering with early-stage technology companies. Most recently, Kumi did serve as the Chief Business Development and Strategy Officer of Root Insurance. He has also held leadership roles with extensive business development experiences across a number of technology-driven industries, including live video and Twitter. Welcome, Kumi. And lastly, the panel will be moderated today by our CEO of the Rise Together Innovation Center, Ms. Danielle Sidnor, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to sit with you all here for this panel. And like any great panel, we have questions, but we're going to deviate a little bit, if that's okay. Right. We're going to start, though, with the first question that's been prepared, which is, according to the book by Simon Bailey, Release Your Brilliance, each of us has something that makes us brilliant. Please briefly introduce yourself to the audience professionally and tell us a bit about what makes you brilliant or perhaps what gets you up in the morning. Emily, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. You know, sometimes it's hard to talk about ourselves and our brilliance, right? It's easier to let other people talk about it. But, you know, I started my career working in government, working for a U.S. congressman in Western Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh area. Saw some enormous change in that community, really positive change. And then for the last 15 years, I've been serving with the Center for Community Solutions, an organization that's been around for 109 years, mission to improve health, social, and economic conditions. We've changed the name a little bit of the mission. It was welfare at first. We don't say that anymore. But really the point has been the same throughout the period of time, the long period that Community Solutions has been there. And I think one of the things that we do really well and that I do hopefully particularly well is like what you have on your table, right? Pulling together nuggets and kernels of information to try and illuminate something important about communities and what's happening in communities and what's happening to the people who are living in those communities that can be useful and used by those of you in the room and outside the room who are trying to make a difference. So, you know, I'm always looking for things that are levers, the sort of simple solutions that can make a big difference. You know, in the opening remarks, there were a lot of conversations about silver bullets. There aren't any silver bullets, but John Kania from FSG, who was the author of the collective impact work that came out several years ago, always talks about silver buckshot. And I think that's a better way to think of it. What are those many things? It's not one thing, but what are the things that we can put together in combination to really make a difference in people's lives? And it's probably going to be different for each person. So figuring out what's the combination of things that we can bring together, that in and of itself can be innovation.
Thank you. And we're going to dig into this a little bit more. Community Solutions does some of my favorite work, and so I'm grateful that you guys participated today. Naveed?
I think it's really interesting you say that you need all of these things, and the combination of those things is innovation, because that's really what we're doing at Dollar, is we've combined a bunch of stuff that separately doesn't make too much of an impact, but together makes a big, big deal. It is difficult to talk about yourself sometimes. So I'll focus on what I wake up for every morning. I think I'm addicted to helping people. There are people out there who are very smart, they're determined, they're resilient, and they're doing all the right things, but they can't help themselves out of the situation that they're in. And that's what drives everything I do.
Rob?
Thanks for having me on this panel, Danielle. My name is Rob Moore. I think the thing that I contribute and this thing that gets me up in the morning, so I started my career as an organizer in Omaha, Nebraska. I did neighborhood organizing, and then I ended up getting into public health organizing, doing work around substance abuse and then reproductive health in Nebraska. But like, I'm an analyst at heart. I love spreadsheets. I love numbers. I love solving problems. And I moved back here after grad school at UC Berkeley, and started out working for the state for a little bit and then for a think tank. And a few years ago, I started Scioto-Analysis, which is a public policy analysis practice that's focused on trying to improve public policy analysis at the state and local level. And we do tax and budget work, health and human services work, and energy and environment work. And really, I do think, yeah, there's a silver buckshot problem, question here for a lot of these problems, but there's also questions about what the public sector can do to help people solve problems on their own. And I think when we're having conversations with Danielle and I've had about cash transfers and putting the tools in the hands of people who are dealing with these problems to solve their own problems, I think that's what comes up with a lot of that. So I'm sure we'll have more conversation to have about that pretty soon.
Thank you, Rob. Kumi?
First, thank you to Tiffany for inviting me and for Danielle for having me on the panel. I feel I'm the least qualified to be on this panel, but I'm excited to be here. I'm going to deviate slightly. I want to thank Danielle for sharing her story. I actually don't know a black man in real life that has not been harassed by a police officer, and not many people understand that, but I think I love that you brought that to this. I also want to comment, because I don't feel qualified, I came prepared. I think it's really important, if you haven't read The Color of Law, to read The Color of Law. I think it's the best book I have read that helps explain the context of what systemic racism means and how our communities end up the way they are. I got really passionate about this when I have two boys, two sons. When I had kids and I realized children, when the way their minds work, they have to make sense of the world. So unless you give them the understanding of the context of how things happened, they start to make conclusions about people. All people do this. And until we understand the context of how our communities got to be the way they were, we're all going to be ignorant and have made the wrong conclusions. So go back to the thing that gets me up in the morning, or a thing I think is unique about me. I like really unstructured, complex problems. And I'm a very direct person, and I like uncomfortable conversations. And I've basically built a career around that.
Well, Kumi will get along really well. So we have a couple more questions that we're going to go through, but I do hope that some of the discussion in the panel will yield itself based on the things that you all say that just make sense for us to kind of follow up on. So I do want to do one of the next questions, which is a meme that is on the screen now. Innovation, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So I'm going to start with Kumi and Naveed to give us, as you all have been in these spaces that people traditionally associate with innovation, tech and tech-based things, when you think of innovation, what does it mean to you? Either one of you goes first.
Yeah, I can start. So I kind of boil it down to problem solving within the context of a changing environment. And the simplest way I think about this is actually looking at giving a specific example. So when people were thinking about getting people online in places outside of Western Europe, United States, like in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and India, the challenge was the ways that people got connectivity in the West did not translate to these other areas of the world. And in viewing that challenge through that lens, it was actually impossible to think of connectivity in those places. What then ended up happening was, more than any other place in the world, those areas adopted mobile phones, which meant that there were farmers in sub-Saharan Africa that had mobile phones before many people in the United States had mobile phones. So connectivity actually to those farmers ended up going through a device that wasn't even as widely distributed in the West yet. And now everyone has shifted to mobile. But that was truly an innovation that solved the problem of connectivity. Now, if you only looked at the problem of connectivity through how connectivity had been established to that point, there still wouldn't be internet in areas of sub-Saharan Africa and India. But it was the devices, it was a new technology that became available that changed the way that we thought about the problem, and that both of those things needed to exist. There needed to be a problem, and there needed to be a new constraint that created an innovation.
Naveed?
I love all of that a lot. I think innovation is the outcome of a system for asking better questions quickly. And that example that Kumi gave actually was something that I was thinking about growing up in Tanzania, Eastern Africa. It felt like our phones were so much better than when I came to college. I was like, what's going on over here? So it's remarkable that finding a gap and then asking good questions that drive you to better actions, that give you better questions, can solve real problems.
So Emily, you have prepared this document that's on everyone's table. And as Kumi and Naveed talked about, essentially thinking about innovation from first really trying to identify what the problem is. If you would briefly kind of just walk us through maybe why you even chose some of this information that you did and why it's impactful as we're thinking about poverty in Franklin County and understanding some of these root issues.
Sure, happy to. Well, I could talk about poverty data all day, but we won't, because we don't want to keep studying the problem, right? We want to be making solutions. And so what we've done is pulled together some of what we think are the most salient points about poverty in your community, in the Franklin County community. And one thing I'll say right off the bat, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but we have this number here of 192,400 people. Those are the people that the Census Bureau says have household incomes that are below the official poverty thresholds. There's a lot of problems with that statement and with where those poverty thresholds are set and where they're measured. But I think probably a better number is one, Danielle, that you shared with me, which is close to 400,000. So about double that number of people are below 200% of the federal poverty level. We know that the poverty thresholds are so low that people cannot get by. They cannot support their family at those levels. And many benefit programs have eligibility that's much higher than that poverty threshold. But if we only look at the official statistics, it's 1 in 7 residents of Franklin County. They're not spread evenly. They're not spread evenly geographically, they're not spread evenly in age, and they're not spread evenly in race. And just about everything we look at, they're not spread evenly. But there are people in every community across the county that are living in poverty or struggling to make ends meet and can use some additional help. You know, the younger you are, the more likely you are to live in poverty. That's true here, it's true across the state, it's true across the country. Many of the people who are living in poverty are children, and if you add older adults on there, we cannot employ ourselves out of this problem. This is a more widespread problem, which is why on the back you have some information about poverty and work. And this is sort of making that point, right? We cannot employ ourselves out of the problem of poverty, but employment's an important component. Because if someone in a family has a job that pays a sustaining wage that has benefits, a whole bunch of good stuff can follow. If they don't, if no one does in the family, then a whole myriad of problems often tends to arise. And when we think about poverty and the conditions around it, problems tend to go together, right? And that's what makes it so difficult, because you can fix one thing, but something else happens, and it's a real challenge for families. In this community, at the kind of bottom of the piece on work, you can see there some of the closest that we can get to apples, looking at wages for people, different people by gender and by race and ethnicity. In your community here in Franklin County, we are looking only at full-time workers that worked the full year. And what we see is that black women in Franklin County earn about 60 cents of every dollar that white non-Hispanic men in Franklin County earn. Now, behind those numbers is a whole bunch of additional information. It has to do with the types of jobs that are available to different people, which has a lot to do with the educational attainment that they've achieved, which has a lot to do with the family resources that they had growing up and the ability of their parents to take advantage of some of the things that, Danielle, you mentioned in your opening remarks, that your family was able to take advantage to help you overcome some of those disadvantages. But not everyone has a grandma that's writing grants to make sure that they can do those things. And so I think that of all of this data, that's one of the most important things to take away, is that behind every one of these statistics, there's much more information, and at the base of them are people living their lives, trying the best they can, but meeting against challenges and barriers and finding ways that we can help people overcome those disadvantages can have great benefit to entire neighborhoods, to entire families, and to entire communities, and to the tax base, ultimately.
Well, Emily, I think you segued really appropriately because, Rob, one of the things that we have talked about are policy interventions that, for some people seem very uncomfortable to think about talking about. But if we can't totally employ our way out of this, there are other things that have to happen. So talk to us a little bit about the policy kind of landscape in Ohio, which, tends to be a little bit dynamic as you're trying to address issues and thinking about some of the work that you've been doing.
Yeah. Ohio's an interesting place when it comes to policy. And when we have a city and a county here that has, a different landscape than the state, and then that has a different landscape than the federal government. There's all these different layers that we're working with and trying to, balance all these different perspectives on what poverty looks like and how to deal with poverty can be kind of difficult. But we do have a few things that are worth paying attention to with Central Ohio. I go back to this study that's happened every few years. I don't know when the next time it's going to happen is, because it was done by an organization that's now defunct, but the Central Ohio benchmarking study, really cool study that compares Central Ohio to 22 other communities that are kind of similar in size across the country. And, we fall pretty in the middle on a lot of different statistics, but one in particular that stands out to me that we fall pretty low on is that only about 2 in 5 children aged 3 to 4 are enrolled in school. And we're lower than any other city in that benchmarking report besides Las Vegas and Louisville. And what does that mean for how we're helping kids get their first steps into the school environment? And what does that mean for reading levels? And, if there are ways that you can do early childhood wrong. We've seen that done in Quebec, where they created a universal program where anyone can get childcare support, and a whole bunch of people put children into childcare, but there were no quality controls put in place. So actually, children's outcomes went down. Parents became more stressed because they were like, oh, we can put our kids in school, and they spent more time away from their children and then more time in working conditions. And often it is, a good early childhood program is one where a child is being taken care of by a parent. So you don't want to necessarily say everyone needs to be in school at that age, but if it is high quality, it can get people off to a really good start. And do I think that 40% of children is the ideal amount of children to be in an early childhood program? It's probably a little bit higher than that, I'd assume, looking at a lot of the cities that we're comparing ourselves against, especially when you look at a place like San Jose that has 58% rather than the 41% we have here. So I think of early childhood. We've also talked about cash transfers and guaranteed income. That's something that people are very afraid to talk about. And there are a lot of reasons that people are afraid to talk about it. People are worried about work incentives. People are worried about how to pay for it. But at Center for Community Solutions did a great, just little kind of a back of the envelope analysis, but a very important analysis a few years ago on how many people in Ohio are probably living on under $2 a day. And I've gone back to this little blog post over and over and over again. And a few years ago, I took a look at that and said, all right, well, if we have about 200,000 people in Ohio that are living under $2 a day, according to Center for Community Solutions. That means there's probably about 24,000 in Franklin County, and these numbers may have changed by now. But if we wanted to get those people out of extreme poverty, and this is the threshold for international extreme poverty, it'd only take about $10 to $17 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but if we increased our sales tax by just 0.05%, we could pay for that. Again, it sounds like a big lift, it sounds like a lot, but that's just 10 cents on a $200 shopping spree at Easton that you'd be paying. Seems like it might be a trade-off we might be, worthwhile taking. And it doesn't sound like a lot to say, okay, we could make sure that people would be guaranteed not to live in extreme poverty in Franklin County. I mean, clearly $2 a day isn't a living wage, but would it be good for us to say no one's going to be under that threshold, and that's the absolute minimum that we're going to allow for? I mean, that is a big step that isn't so impractical.
Right. So, Kumi, I have a question for you because Emily kind of talked about the problem, so to speak, and laid out some of the numbers. And Rob has talked about two different, very quickly, ideas of things that could be done to address specific populations that are impacted by poverty. And you gave the example of farmers having access to a device that in the West wasn't. And so it was like, again, the same problem with two different types of potential outcomes. In thinking about poverty and the goal of trying to implement new big ideas, when you have had the opportunity to work on innovative type things, who are the types of people in an organization you typically need? What type of skill set, what kind of roles and responsibilities to be able to move from problem identification, potential solutions, to like actually testing and executing something?
So I'll go back something to Nabitha. I think you need people that ask great questions because it really is getting to the 10th, 12th, whatever the question is, when you start to actually understand the problem. There's this concept of inclusive design that has started happening in technology, and that means a lot of things depending on where you hear it, but the one I like is when you actually build products for the most underserved, you actually improve the product quality for everyone. So there's an example from Uber. So Uber is always looking for more drivers, and they realized that they couldn't recruit deaf drivers, drivers that were hard of hearing, because people would try and talk to them when they got in the Uber, and that made them very uncomfortable because they couldn't hear them. So they built a feature specifically to recruit more deaf drivers, where in the app, you could see that the driver was hard of hearing. And so before you got in, you knew not to address that driver. Do you know who used that feature the third most? Deaf drivers. Do you know who used it the second most? Immigrants. Because immigrants were harassed by a number of people when they found out that they didn't speak English as well. Do you know who used it the most? People that didn't want to talk to passengers. So they basically had this feature that was specifically designed to just recruit a small percentage of more drivers that were deaf, that ended up the people using it the most were drivers that were in much larger segments of their driver population.
Yeah.
So that is just an example of the reason that goes back to the questions asked, and it's like, well, what are you trying to solve? It's actually, I don't want to interact with the person getting into the car. Oh, well, if we build that feature, there are a lot of other groups that will be able to benefit from that. Yeah. So I think I get great question askers.
Great question askers. So we're going to write that down. And Naveed, and you also talked about in your work, it is kind of pulling together a bunch of things that maybe don't seem very impactful separately that have great impact together. And I think even building off of what Kumi talked about in terms of asking the question who you're solving it for, and if you solve something for the most impacted population. So talk a little bit about when you're building something that's innovative, the time, how long it takes, because I think about working on poverty and you're not going to fix it in 12 months. Tell my board that. All right. No, they know. And we've been talking about this, but timelines of doing things that seem big and audacious and that you're trying to convince people, what does that look like?
I'll just add, I think this notion of inclusive design is very, very powerful. It actually started by some person who wanted to help his wife peel potatoes. It's called the potato peeler phenomenon. And she had difficulty grasping stuff. And so he built a more usable handle so she could enjoy cooking in the kitchen without help. And every time you try to solve a problem for a very particular person for whom it is impacting most, you find that you end up solving a problem for a much larger subset of folks. So in terms of the timeline or the level, I think it's always better off, at least what has worked for us well, is to set goals that are so crazy and ambitious that if you accomplish even half of what you've set out to do, you've made a big difference for somebody. And I would say, why can't we fix poverty in Franklin County in 12 months? Maybe we've just not asked the right questions. So there must be a way somewhere.
I also, just to add on, I also think it's helpful to ship something, like have an event, move forward, like demonstrate progress. Like I think breaking things down builds momentum, and people respond to momentum.
Yeah.
And you get more resources as you demonstrate momentum. Literally, that's how companies get funded. That's how people get traction in their careers. Just showing some early traction on something, not solving it for a family, and talk about that. Have the family talk about how you solve it. Those types of things I think are really important, and I think sometimes really large initiatives lose sight of that and don't want to talk about anything until it's close to being solved.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could jump in too, I think this question of timelines is really important in this work, and I'll give an example of that. So if what you're trying to do is improve poverty for kids in the next 5 years, say, let's give ourselves more than 12 months. We'll give ourselves 60 months. In 5 years, you don't work on early care and education because we're going to have to wait 20 years for the kids that are 5-year-olds now to have the benefit, to feel the full benefit of those. If you're talking about reducing poverty for kids in the next 5 years, you need to be working with their families and the income of their families, and that's the fastest way to get kids out of poverty. I see this all the time, especially with United Ways, whom I love, but United Ways like to set big goals. They've kind of gotten away from this the last couple of years because they figured it out. And a couple years ago, I was going around the state talking to United Ways, and they almost all had a goal around high school graduation. And they had this bold goal, high school graduation, we're going to improve it, and we're going to do it in 2 years. But their solutions were to work on third grade reading. Well, those third graders aren't going to be seniors for another 9 years. So you have a mismatch there. And it's about asking the right questions, but like really thinking about it. Do we want kids to be better off? Absolutely. Early care and education, high quality preschool has been shown to do that. It has an amazing return on investment, but that return happens decades from now. Yeah. If we want to do it right, where are the issues right now? And those things that we can move to change things much more quickly. And they're not always the things that are popular that you want to talk about. It's a lot easier to talk about helping kids than it is to talk about, giving universal basic income to parents. Although we kind of did it with the child tax credit for 6 months there.
Yeah,
We did.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you guys each just final question, then we're going to open it up for some Q&A real quick. So just really kind of off that last point that you made, we've seen some of these things where we have been able to do things for short blips of time that work, and then all of a sudden we stop. And it's something that I've never understood. We do it, and it's like, oh, we saw tremendous progress, and then that thing doesn't get funded anymore, whatever that thing is. So as you think about your experiences and work, and again, you guys all have different backgrounds, be it in policy or in business and others, what is one thing that you have either helped to shepherd, create, or participated in, or seen in community that you thought was amazing and it just went away? And if you were king for a day, you'd bring it back.
You want me to go first?
Whoever
I'll go
comes
first.
up with their idea.
I think it is the child tax credit. Last year, for 6 months, there were funds coming in to families every month through the IRS and through the Treasury Department. It was not tied to what the parents are doing. It was only tied to the children. It was basically no strings attached dollars that families could use for whatever they wanted. Our research showed that around 60 to 75% of people were using it for basic necessities. in the fall, in August, we saw a huge uptick in people using it for clothes, and we think it's back to school shopping. You know, that was the thing that the family deemed most important. A lot of families used it to pay down debt or increase their savings. More white families did that than black families, I should note, which we can have a whole nother conference to talk about that. But then it stopped. It was there, it was coming for 6 months, helped people pay rent, was the closest we've ever come, I think, to a universal basic income kind of idea here through the federal government, wasn't enormously expensive, but wasn't popular enough to continue. And, you know, legislators didn't do that. And I think it's the most innovative thing that federal government has done to address poverty in decades.
Yep.
And it's really a simple program to administer. They didn't have to build out a whole bunch of new stuff.
Yep.
It didn't cost a lot to administer, but could have a big impact. And it's about political will to continue it. And it's about leadership in Washington and kind of who has the power and who is asking for what. And who's throwing a fit when it ends. There's still time. We can still put it back. It's not over forever.
That's right.
But for now, it's gone.
Others?
Yeah, I'll do another one that's kind of big picture, and I can in no way claim this one, that I had any influence on this
Oh, yeah, I
one
have
at all.
nothing to do with the child tax credit.
But I think as a good illustration, kind of a similar thing, when I think about our renewable portfolio standard for Ohio and the fact that 15 years ago, the state of Ohio unanimously, the state legislature passed a law that would have us at 25% renewable by 2025. And looking at the date that we are right now and how close we would be to that if the legislature since then hadn't chipped and chipped and chipped away back to the point where now it's 6.25. And that just blows my mind that we had all this consensus and it was so built around and everyone was so ready to get there. And then things just reversed and changed, and it was Democrats and Republicans who were on board with this. And the political winds shifted. Things, I think maybe coal got kind of wrapped up in some of the federal politics around, you know, and people's opinions of the, you know, Barack Obama and just like a lot of really dumb stuff just got us to this point where now we've taken this big step back. And I mean, in the medium term, we have had this very, like a promising shift away from coal towards natural gas, which has reduced our carbon emissions in Ohio, but like that's not a long-term solution by any stretch. We're going to have to move toward more sustainable energy if we want to, you know, transition into a new energy economy, and that's trying to figure out how people are going to have jobs in Ohio. That's trying to, you know, figure out how we're going to make sure that we're not continually polluting out and making people in third world countries pay for, you know, our lifestyle here. And I think it's just that's a situation where I'm still trying to get my head around why we were able to make this massive big commitment and put things in writing and have this big consensus around it that just slowly dissolved over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
I'll share a couple things. I think the investment, the recognition of, and the thoughtful kind of work to understand and improve the lives of essential workers that, at the beginning of the pandemic has kind of almost gone away.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a time we realized, wow, there's a crisis, but we still need people to bring us food. And, but those people have kids and they have no childcare. We still need people to transport us around the city. And that has almost gone away. I think and I don't know if this has gone away, but this is something that actually just thought of when I first got here was in Baltimore. Baltimore City has a crisis with real estate. They have all of these abandoned townhomes, and they have a workforce problem. They have all these people that aren't working, and they have a food insecurity problem, like triple whammy of the people that live in, because no grocery stores are coming to inner city Baltimore. I'm from Maryland, so years ago, and I don't know if this is still if they still are investing in this. They created urban farms, where they took some of these abandoned buildings, townhomes and literally built farms and taught community members how to farm and gave them access to whole foods, vegetables. Whole Foods wouldn't build a grocery store there, but they literally had access to some high quality vegetables, fruits that they were growing themselves, that they were making money from, selling it to folks outside of the community. And I don't think that's still happening, and it's not clear to me why, but it was one of the smartest things I'd ever, like innovation of what to do to solve those three problems. I don't know if that's something that's ever happened here in Central Ohio, but that's something I think is a pretty incredible innovation.
Thank you for sharing. Evie?
I didn't grow up here, so the example I'll give is from Tanzania, which I think was a fantastic innovation. Lots of similar problems with getting to and from work, making sure that your children are taken care of, making sure they have a good education. And there's a strong willingness and big surprise, especially among women who are the most entrepreneurial of that group. They said that we want to make money, we have a plan, this is how we run our businesses, we just don't have a place to do it. And the government said, you can set up shop anywhere you like. And it changed everything, right? You could walk out, and if there's a wall, there's a wall around somebody's house, you could set up your shop right there, earn money, pay taxes, because we're smart like that with mobile phones, and be a citizen that's giving back in many ways. So I think that's wonderful. It would be really interesting to see how to do something like that here.
Mobile pop-ups can be anywhere with a business. So I know that we've had a chance to ask some of our questions. We want to open it up for the audience for about 10 minutes to do some Q&A. There's a microphone placed here. So if you would like to ask a question of any of our panelists, feel free to come to the microphone. And I know this is not a shy group. Y'all have questions. I saw you writing things down. If you just come to the microphone, just so that way, as the recording, your voice will pick up. It's right over here in the middle. Thanks. All right, Joy.
Just really quick, when we went through this process, one of the things we talked about was where does the entity of wealth come in, right? We're teaching people how to, get out of poverty, but what we understand is poverty is generational poverty, right? Stories like Danielle or mine, it happens, but if we build more families in wealth, then we can really get to more people. We can touch more children, more families. So where does the conversation, when do we start teaching people more about wealth and not just survival?
Yeah. Any of the panelists want to take a stab?
Well, from a policy standpoint, Derek Hamilton has talked about baby bonds. That's a topic that a lot of people have come up with. This is, in a way, you could think about this as an alternative to like a cash transfer, like a monthly cash transfer or an annual cash transfer, where folks will get basically an account when they're 18 years old that has money that's saved up into it, and then be able to use that for a number of different options. Under different policy designs, it could be a range of different things that could be used for, but I don't think that, I think there's a certain amount of progress you can make from financial education, but I think sometimes we overstate the usefulness of financial education. We sort of talk about like, oh, people just don't know how to save, and it's like, well, you save by having enough money to save it, and if the finances aren't there, it doesn't matter how much of a whiz you are with your Excel spreadsheet on your budget or your mint.com app. It's about having the resources to save in the first place. And again, there's no silver bullet. It is more of a silver buckshot, so you probably need to have both. But ultimately, having policies in place that will give people opportunities to be able to save, I think, is probably a piece of this puzzle at least.
Joy, I would add to that in that in my personal experiences and then in conversations I've had with people, a part of the wealth conversation is also social capital. The number of people that so when we think about being hyper segregated economically in Franklin County, you could talk to people about saving and investing, but learning how to buy real estate or having disposable income and choosing or knowing how to use it to buy a property that's going to create some passive income, that may be things that sometimes you're able to learn just from a social network that may not ever be taught in school, and not everybody has to go to school to learn these things. And so how do we do and create more natural spaces where people from multiple socioeconomic backgrounds can come together to share and learn experiences is one of the things that I think is challenging about the way we do a lot of our programs, because if everybody in the program is low to moderate income, now everybody's in the same general kind of like social network. If we would stop that and say whomever wants to participate, and then also ensure that there's participation for folks that are low to moderate income, now the kid that's affluent and the kid that's LMI are coming together, they're friends, and oh, my dad has this thing he owns and whatever, and you can come work here. You immediately start to move up a wealth creation conversation that doesn't necessarily happen sometimes other places. And so I think we have to lean into the importance of social capital a whole lot more in ways that we make decisions.
And I think, I mean, when we think about wealth and we think about 400 years of American history, those are the places where racism happen and happen over and over again and still happen. I mean, it's in the challenges. There are all these studies about discrimination in loans and different people's experience. It still happens. It happens at banks every day. Yeah. And on the forms, people at banks are guessing somebody's race based on what they look like to report on it to say, I didn't discriminate, but they're guessing. And, this is still happening here in 2022. And when we think about policies and, policy is intentional, this is not an accident. Social Security was not set up to benefit everybody when it was first set up. It was exclusionary of the professions that most people of color in this country were working in at the time, not to mention women. And so communities of color set up their own ways of support, which meant that you couldn't save for your child's future because you were paying for your mom's health care because government wasn't there to help in the same way that government was there to help, frankly, white middle-class people. And so I think that's some of what we have to break down and meet people's immediate needs first, and then we can start talking about wealth. I agree 100% that thinking about budgeting only works if you have something to budget. It's not that people aren't using their money wisely. They don't have enough money. And so figuring out how can you can have policies that are, really any social service policy is anti-racist, because the people who benefit the most tend to be Black and brown communities. We don't always like to say that or talk about it. It's more convenient to not talk about it because, if people realize that we're among friends, we can say it out loud here. But I think recognizing that just about any social service policy can help those communities, can be anti-racist, and can also allow the space to then allow some wealth building and figure out ways that people can feel confident that it'll stay in their hands and not be taken away.
Yeah. Question? If you say your name and then ask your question.
Melanie Hill, and my question is related to this conversation. And can you guys talk about the concept of redistribution of wealth? Because it seems like if you just think about how it's so concentrated amongst such a few number of people, is what we're doing right now, is it enough? And do we really need to be having a conversation about some kind of radical redistribution of wealth to actually make a lasting difference for, enough people to kind of shift the balance of everything?
Great question. Anybody want to take a stab?
I think so. I think the data that we have here around income, and when you talk about social service policies, the largest one is our tax code.
Yep.
Right. So our tax code is really built for wealth preservation. It is not built for wealth redistribution. That's explicit. So, the idea that there isn't enough money to fund a $2, $10, $100 a day for every American is kind of absurd. There is enough money.
That's right.
We find it for other things. The challenge is those are the most marginalized people in society. They can't afford to take a day off to do anything, let alone lobby a congressperson, let alone send money to a senator. They have no power in our society. But the reality is there's plenty of money.
I quip sometimes that we have enough money to do anything, but we don't have enough money to do everything. So, you know, those choices about, I mean, I think here in Ohio, and we don't have an estate tax any longer, and that the money that was being brought in from the estate tax was being used for lots of things, and then there's a hole. And then suddenly we have to cut a bunch of programs to try and fill the hole. That's a decision. So I think it has to be part of the conversation, but I don't think it's the whole conversation. Because there are lots of innovative things that can happen by cobbling together solutions that already exist in ways that kind of think about things differently.
I think the redistribution of wealth is more than just money, right? It's also mindset. A lot of the times when we speak to people who are considered to be in poverty, a lot of the advice we give them starts with scarcity. Like, that's not a good place to start. You have to start with an abundance, right? Like, how do we get you to abundance? You have every drive and motivation to do so. How do we, so speaking of, I read something really interesting the other day, that if you want to make $100,000 a month, then you should hang out with people who make $100,000 a month. Redistributing the knowledge, the things that it took to do that is also a very big component of it. And I think, yes, the tax code is not doing what we'd hope it would do. However, I think everybody has an incentive to help our neighbors, right? Like, these literally are our neighbors. 1 in 7 people, you probably know somebody, you see them every day. We all have an incentive to help them do something. And managing mechanisms to turn those incentives into cash and other things, time, I think would be very impactful.
Yeah, and I'll chime in too. Cytoanalysis is going to be coming out with a study on inequality, a comprehensive study on inequality in Ohio this summer. So stay tuned for that. We'll have some interesting data out on inequality across the state. But when we look at like countries that have very low inequality, like Nordic countries, for instance, the interesting thing that we find is that inequality pre-tax looks very similar in Nordic countries and in the United States. And it's really the tax and transfer system that changes that. And, you know, there's a lot of question about, like, why are these countries able to do that and create the social safety net system that works so well? And a lot of people point to the homogeneous population there and the fact that folks in those countries, they have this social cohesion, a lot of it because people aren't afraid of people who are different from them, because there aren't so many people who are different from them that are there. They kind of have a leg up in that way. And how we can build that bridge and make it so that people don't tie in these assumptions they have about other people, and realize that if we have a safety net, that's catching everyone. It makes it, when we talk about the interaction between innovation and poverty, it's so much easier to go out on a limb and start a business if you know that there's going to be something that's back there to catch you. And if you have good social capital, it's easy for you to do that. If mom and dad will come and bail you out if your business falls apart, like, maybe you'll go out and start that business. But when we look at these zip codes that have less patents across the country, they're concentrated in places of low social capital where people don't have that thing to fall back on. And maybe if our safety net was a little bit better, we'd have more innovation and people coming up with newer ideas. So there's big interaction between our legacy of racism and systemic discrimination and chronic poverty and our problems with that and inequality in the United States.
Good. I think we have one last question, and then we'll wrap up the panel.
So, hi, my name is Sandy. Thank you for being here. It was really interesting to listen to all of you, actually. My question is probably a little bit different. I think this room tends to be filled with people who care, and I think that is deeply important to this. So we can talk about sharing social capital, we can talk about changing policy, all of these things. I think we have a group of people, and it's pretty big, in Central Ohio that really cares. But I know there's a lot of people that don't. Doesn't resonate for them. They don't think about it. They live in their bubble. So I tend to believe we can make a change here, but I truly think it will be despite the state of Ohio. Okay? I know. Those of you who know me are like, yeah, here she goes. Yeah, it wouldn't be me if I didn't do it, though. But it scares me. And the reason it scares me is because deeply well-meaning people with social capital willing to share it, people who are good policy changers, are going to have to come together in Central Ohio, despite what's happening elsewhere, and try to make this happen. And it's sad, but it is what it is. And I'm curious, I look for hope in these moments. I spend a lot of time on these issues, and I don't need to, but I do it because I genuinely care. So for the people that don't, or need to see a pathway to getting involved in this, what is your thought? What is that moment of hope that wakes you up every day and you like, we're going to get this done? You think we can get it done? I think we can too. I know what my moment of hope is, and I don't really want to share that because I'm curious what you have to say. I think it matters for how we take this conversation forward, and if you'd be willing to share that, I think it would be a great way for us to carry into this conversation.
Thanks, Sandy. Anybody want to start?
Okay, I'll give some moments of hope in places that we wouldn't necessarily see them coming from. One moment of hope I think of is Mitt Romney and the child tax credit. The fact that we had a Republican senator who is well known across the country and has been caught publicly saying some very disparaging things about low-income people, but has still rallied around a proposal around trying to give cash to low-income people and use that as a way to try to break systemic poverty. Another one I think of is the bipartisan reform around education that's happened at the state level in Ohio, and that we have a new school funding formula that has had some progress over some of the past ones. It's by no means perfect, but the fact that there was a huge, that things were moved in a positive direction with Republicans and Democrats getting behind it, I think is something to be, to have some positivity around. And the third one I think of, and this was a very strange but surprising thing that came out of the reform around the gasoline tax pre-COVID, was the expansion of the earned income tax credit that happened. That was it was basically Republicans and Democrats getting around and saying like, well, we're worried about what an expansion of the gasoline tax would do to low-income people, since a lot of low-income people end up paying for that. So how do we balance that? And there was a expansion of the earned income tax credit that came around that, which, as many of us here know, earned income tax credit is the biggest anti-poverty program in the country besides Social Security. And there's still things that need to be done. We need to make it refundable if we really want it to be as effective as it is in other states. But there are situations where folks who have different perspectives are willing to come together and improve things and move the ball forward on reducing poverty. And it's going to take creativity. It's going to take folks being willing to put themselves, their necks out politically sometimes. But we've got the political situation we've got to figure out how to make the best of that and how to try to get those wins where we can. And it's going to be difficult. We're not going to be able to see sea change tomorrow, but if we can at least ask the right questions at the right time, there are situations where folks can, make some of this change.
I think excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
The thing that I have the most hope about is the human brain. We have this thing called mirror neurons in our brain. So when we see somebody feeling sad, we feel sad. When we see somebody feeling happy, we feel happy. Some of the biggest people who don't agree with some of these programs, they feel like in order to pull people up, they have to go down. And it's actually quite the opposite. When you pull people up, everybody rises up. And by creating those moments where you see joy and don't expect somebody to be appreciative for the thing that they should have as a human being, there will be a collective increase in joy. That's my view.
Mine is not going to sound hopeful.
Yeah.
But I am hopeful. I am hopeful. I think language is important. So when there was the crack epidemic, the way that our country responded to that was we actually blamed the families of the people that were strung out on drugs. We over-policed those people, and we put them in prison. When people in the center of the United States got strung out on opioids, we responded very differently. We called it an opioid crisis. We sent relief. There's $24 billion coming from the US government this year to help support people getting back to the workforce for opioids. That's amazing. That's great. Now, it took the problem happening to mostly white people for us to find the money to solve the problem. But that problem is going to help a lot of black and brown people too. It's going to help a lot of people. So Unfortunately, there's a lot of despair that's happened because of wealth inequality. It's not just in Black communities. And because it's actually happening outside of Black and brown communities, for some reason, we are finding money to help address these problems. So that's why I'm hopeful.
And I guess my moment of hope probably isn't going to sound hopeful either, but it's the Great Resignation. People didn't go back. People said enough. I'm not going back to this crummy job where I don't have dignity, where I'm treated poorly by my employer. I'm treated poorly by the customers who I'm trying to serve. I'm not making enough to make ends meet. I'm not going to do it. And when you have enough people that say that, then it becomes really disruptive, and we can think about how to do things a little bit differently. It's inconvenient for me because restaurants are closed that I want to go to, but that's okay. And I think living through the crisis of COVID, I see a lot of hope. I think our country responded quite well from a human dignity perspective in the early months. We did a lot of things, and Community Solutions was going crazy with all right, let's try all of it.
Right.
Let's get rid of all of the barriers to getting people on benefits. It's all being, rolled back now. Let's just give people the full amount of SNAP and food stamps. Get people fed. We can do it. We've just shown we can do it. Mm-hmm. And so kind of remembering some of those lessons, those of us with kids have all experienced what happens when you don't have childcare and when you're supposed to be working. That's been a reality for low-income people who don't work traditional hours for their whole lives. But now we've all experienced what it's like to be socially isolated, a problem that we only talked about with older adults up until the pandemic. And so my moment of hope is remembering my own personal experiences and asking those that I interact with to think back and to remember how that felt, to be empathetic. The mirror brain, I think it all relates, to be empathetic to those that didn't go back to normal. Mm-hmm. And didn't have the ability to make it work, and how challenging some of those things are. And we're letting go of the fault aspect of it, right? The pandemic is nobody's fault. Employers were able to make it work. Workers were able to make it work. It stunk, but, we lived through it. And so having a little bit more empathy and learning from the crisis and what was able to be achieved, we just have to keep reminding people.
That we did it once, we can do it again.
We did it once. It's possible.
Well, I want you all to give the panel a great big round of applause. Thank you guys so much. You were all qualified to be on this panel, Kumi. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure you guys are ready to kind of get up and stretch and maybe get some coffee or something. So we are going to give you a quick break. Ask that you be back at your tables at 2 o'clock. And then we will kind of transition into our strategy circles and giving you some more information about that. So thanks, everyone.